at this time, I'm going to welcome my four colleague panelists to the stage, and while they're coming to the stage, I just want to share a little bit more about this project that Charlie talked about. So we really hope that the whole point of this project, RESC, is the RESC Sentiment Index, is that this is something that you can use. I'll echo Charlie on that. We want professionals to be able to have something to refer to that allows them and helps them to make business decisions on a day-to-day basis. Using AI to do that, working alongside students who clearly get this stuff and are doing things that some of us can only dream of, and we're twice their age. But I digress. This is going to be a really fun project to be able to share with all of you. So please actually I'll put the QR code up there for one more minute, just in case anybody wants to take one more snapshot of this. You also could go to, I believe, Spencer Burton is the founder of adventuresinCRE.com. He was a keynote speaker here at Marquette back in 2022. This is a tech-forward company. It's also the best online training program. They're adventuresinCRE.com for real estate financial modeling. We partnered with them for several years and are trying to stay on the front end of the different things that they're doing, and they truly are on the cutting edge of AI and our real estate space as well. So just a really great resource if you're just trying to learn more about how AI is being used in our space. Check out adventuresinCRE.com, and we're so appreciative to be partners with them. All right. I'm really excited to introduce our four panelists. So I'll give a brief intro, and then I'll invite the panelists to the stage. We're going to go through a series of questions, and we have some visuals to be able to show you as well to help illustrate some of the points that we have across different things, from power to water and environment to what's going on in the real estate space to what's going on in land and land use and in investments. With that, let's get started. Steve Disse has been with Colliers for 29 years and serves as the principal of the Chicago office, focusing on investment sales of industrial and office properties in Chicago and the Midwest, ranging from $5 million to $300 million in asset value. Teaming with Jeff Devine, they formed Chicago's most active industrial investment sales team, holding 50 to 60% market share and closing over billions in sales just in the last several years alone. Steve is a recipient of several Transaction of the Year awards and sits on several boards, including the investment committee for our own Marquette's nationally renowned real estate asset program. And he holds an undergraduate degree from Marquette and a graduate degree from UW-Madison. So Steve, welcome. Sarah Fox. Professor Fox's scholarship focuses on the intersections of environmental law, property, and land use, particularly the unique environmental issues facing cities and the capacity of local governments to solve these problems. She holds a cum laude JD and an LLM in advocacy with honors from Georgetown University Law Center and a summa cum laude BA from the University of Oklahoma. Prior to joining Marquette, she was an associate professor at Northern Illinois University College of Law, a visiting associate professor at the University of Iowa Law School, and a clinical teaching fellow at Georgetown. And she has clerked for the Honorable Claire V. Egan and practiced law in New York. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Fox. Kate Phillips, with over 27 years of experience in Wisconsin energy and utility matters for WEC Energy Group, Kate has successfully assisted in the development, permitting, and construction of the $7 billion Power the Future program, including the Elm Road Generating Station and significant renewable investments. Throughout her career, she has navigated complex regulatory matters for WEC utilities, including Wisconsin Electric Power Company, Wisconsin Gas, and Wisconsin Public Service Corporation, and expanded her practice to Minnesota for Minnesota Energy Resources. She holds a bachelor's and law degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please join me in welcoming Kate. And Brandon Zick. Brandon Zick manages all investments for Ceres Partners, including Ceres Farms, Flagship Farmland Fund, and Ceres Food and Agriculture private equity strategies, overseeing valuation analysis, due diligence, portfolio management, and acquisition and negotiations. Before joining Ceres in 2010, he was vice president of strategic acquisition at Morgan Stanley Investment Management and began his career as a finance associate at Lehman Brothers. Brandon serves on the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago Advisory Council and Small Business and Agriculture and Labor Subcouncil. He holds a BBA in finance with a Japanese concentration from the University of Notre Dame and is a chartered alternative investment analyst. Please join me in welcoming Brandon and all of our panelists today to the stage. So we'll let you in on a little behind the scenes of our panel. Professor Fox, not more than 10 minutes ago, was lecturing in front of a law school class. So thank you for rushing over here. You didn't take a scooter, did you?
No.
I know, those are.
Thanks for waiting.
Those are all over the place these days. So glad we could all be together today. So Steve, we're going to start with you. I kind of want to set the stage for this conversation. We're going to get into a lot of things around climate and power and water and land. So all of which clearly impact real estate investment decisions in the Midwest. But from your viewpoint, how's the industrial investment sector performing in this region overall right now? It's an interesting time. And how specifically is the growth in data center development impacting our region?
Well, as someone who's clearly the oldest person on this panel, I have a lot of perspective on that. The Midwestern industrial market is performing okay. Now, okay doesn't sound that good, but on a relative basis, okay is pretty damn good compared to the other places in this country. So there are obvious reasons that that logistics works. Rudy did a fantastic job of talking about, why this is a good place to, have a warehouse. It has, thrived like the whole industrial sector has by this, little thing called Amazon and the internet, and that has really changed it changed the industrial world. I've started doing this, you said 29 years, it's 33 years. And 33 years ago and 20 years ago, clearly industrial sector was a redheaded stepchild of all the sectors. No one wanted to be industrial. It's boring. Everyone wanted to be in retail or office or something. Then a little thing called the internet kicked in and everyone wanted to be industrial. And we had a run that was unprecedented with just demand that would never have been predicted because of internet shopping. So in that sense, it has been an unbelievable run until about a couple years ago where, you had the normal issues of interest rates and we had some slowdowns and maybe we didn't really overbuild the sector per se, but it just sort of normalized. And now, as Rudy said, we were all, last year was, hold out till 25. It's going to be unbelievable in 25. We got, through an election. We didn't have any riots. This is great. Phones were sort of ringing off the hook for a couple months, and then the Trumpster, went to work. So, so now we're pumping the brakes all over the place. There's just very little reason right now with all the noise in the marketplace for any user to make a significant space requirement. And again, and I keep referring to Rudy, when you take a big building in today's world, if you take a 1 million square foot distribution building, if you're an internet fulfillment group, you're going to put 20, 30, 50, $100 million inside that building. It's not just I'm going to sign a lease for, $8 a foot and I'm going to spend $8 million a year in rent. I got to come up, I'm going to put $100 million inside that building. And right now, if you're in the C-suite, you just aren't going to make that decision to do that. So we are on hold. On the investment side, we're probably on hold as well because, well, are we driving this thing into a recession? Are we going to just cut some deals and everything's going to be fine? I mean, I think we're, on the positive side, Jonathan Gray was saying it's 6 months. We got to figure some stuff out. So, so that's not really addressing your question. The question is the Midwest and a data center thing. The data center world has been a boon to the data center world. It's been a boon to Prologis. I don't know, Rudy didn't say that, but he sold that lousy 180,000 foot building for $750 million. I mean, just think about it. This is a stupid building sitting in the middle of Elk Grove, and they figured out how to get that thing worth $750 million. So it's so no wonder they're looking at that. I mean, it's pretty, but so it's an unbelievable dynamic world in the data center business, but it hasn't truly affected the logistics business in a huge way. There are some huge wins like that from developers who happen to own some land that hey, I'm going to build warehouses here, and it happens to be where there's power at, and all of a sudden they make a gigantic amount of money.
But so we have the slide here that, just to give some context, because I thought that as part of the conversation today, helping everybody understand when we think about data center markets around the world, we're very small right now. So you look at the slide here, you can see Chicago is of a healthy size in terms of the kind of data center usage. Virginia is by far the largest around the world. I think that's Beijing is pretty large as well. When you look at something like this, and you think about the conversations that you've had, do you see some runway for quite a bit more data centers in the Midwest? What are investors saying to you about data centers?
I think there's absolute runway, and there's absolutely a capital that wants to participate in the development and the owning of data centers. It's the question of how you get some power from Kate here to actually build these things, and Kate's not going to want to talk to me as a little developer. Hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to build a data center. No one's ever thought of it. You know, it's become a very. It came from a bunch of people, not a bunch, but industrial developers who were private, made a lot of money on accident, almost on accident. They won't admit it's on accident, but now their requests, or this cohort's requests of the power providers are, can't be met. They're getting unlimited amount of phone calls with no, you're not qualified to talk to Kate, and so now it's become a professional business that PLD and very large, deep-pocketed people are there, because you have to put up a bunch of money. You have to, it's not just screw around and, hey, I like Northwest Indiana, there's a lot of power there. I'm a guy, tied up a bunch of farms, and I'm going to get rich because, I can get these data centers. You are going to get rich on that, but you owned farmland because it was farmland. So it's not the get-rich scheme that, I don't even want to call it a scheme, but there were some people that got extremely fortunate and made so much money that all of a sudden every industrial developer, I got to get in the data center business. Look at what happens. Well, that game's over. I mean, Microsoft finds their own sites, and you have to control that land at some point, and I think that it's a professional situation that takes tremendous amounts of capital.
Yeah. Let's stay on the power side here. And so speaking of, industries that 30 years ago weren't as exciting, now utilities. Everyone wants to be your friend, Kate, I think. So I have up on the screen here a little bit more about WC Energy Group. I don't know that the average person knows a lot about how utilities work and how important they are to this discussion. So, Kate, we're so excited that you could join us today. We're talking about power, and not just for data centers, but this continues to be more and more important for all the reasons that Rudy talked about, with all the devices and things like that we have. Can you tell us more about WC Energy Group in particular, and why utilities are all of a sudden super popular?
Sure. So just a little bit about us. As you can see from the slide, we do have utilities in 4 different states. Here in Wisconsin, obviously, it's We Energies, which is Wisconsin Electric Power Company, and Wisconsin Gas. And then we have the Green Bay-based utility, WPS, which we merged with in 2015. And then we have utilities in 3 other states, as shown in the map. So yeah, I mean, from our perspective, right, there has been a lot of focus on the energy industry because data centers use a tremendous amount of energy, right? They have a huge demand for energy. So, which is why I think we're seeing the Microsofts in Racine and Kenosha, and then also Cloverleaf, which isn't an end user. They are actually an entity that does things such as develop the energy infrastructure, and then they sell their project to an end user, a hyperscaler like a Microsoft or Google or someone else. So we are seeing a lot from the perspective of the utility, a huge demand for energy. And in fact, we're predicting that between 2025 and 2029, the next 4 years, we'll add about additional 1,800 megawatts of power. 1 megawatt serves just roughly 200 homes, but that's a 20% increase for us in terms of our energy. So that's a really large increase for a utility, for Wisconsin Electric Power Company. And then in addition to that, which I think Sarah will talk about more than I will, but we are also, the WEC utilities are are reshaping our generation portfolio. We're adding a lot of renewables to our generation. But as most of you know, renewables are not dispatchable, meaning when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, those renewables do not produce energy. So in order to like when you go home and you turn your lights on or you use your blow dryer in the morning and that magically comes on, we as the public utility have an obligation to serve those customers 24/7, 365 days of the year. So we need to make sure that we have reliable power to all our customers, in particular the data centers, right? Data centers require an enormous amount of power, reliable power, resilient power, meaning uninterrupted power. So we have to provide that supply. So in addition to the investments in renewables, Wisconsin Electric, all the WEC utilities are making investments in modernizing our gas fleets. So it's a combination of both.
And I'm excited for us to talk a little bit more about that stack in terms of power, because another thing not a lot of us know about, but it is really actually important. So in terms of framing our conversation today around the future of the Great Lakes, real estate and water and data centers and climate, I think we have to take into account some of those natural assets that we have here. Water, of course, is one of those. And so we're going to go a little bit outside here, but we're going to bring it all back. And Sarah, you're an expert in this space when it comes to environmental regulations and things like that in the Midwest. There's some really important things that are going on in the Midwest around things like the Great Lakes Compact. And I'm not sure that is something that most of us understand. And so I have a slide here on the behind us that you all can see, which shows what the Great Lakes watersheds are, which in a lot of ways tells us what our access is to this 20% of the world's fresh water that just happens to be almost literally in some people's backyards around here. Sarah, can you help us frame this a little bit around like what this map means for Wisconsin, especially for Milwaukee and Chicago, where most of us are from here today, and talk a little bit about water and climate?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you referred to this as a natural asset, and I think that's right? I mean, we are so incredibly lucky in this region to have access to so much fresh water that I think sometimes it can be easy to assume that it will always be there, that it is impossible to exhaust, that nothing we are really doing is going to deplete that. And I think that's just not right? So, just as a little bit of a look back in time, about 99% of the water in the Great Lakes was deposited about 25,000 years ago. I think that's about right. So it's as if our great whatever grandparents, right, set up this natural trust for us. It renews at the rate of about 1% each year. That is not what we would call a renewable resource. And that means that it matters how we manage that resource. And I'm not going to take up time here with lots of statistics about how much comes out every year and how much goes back in. All I will say is that it is certainly possible to deplete that resource at a rate that exceeds its ability to regenerate. It is also true that if you dig into the scientific research on the Great Lakes, pretty much every drop of that water is accounted for in some way, whether that's by human use or other ecosystem use, right? We all know that humans are not the only things that rely on the Great Lakes, and it's also true that even humans appreciate a lot of the ecological benefits that come from having the lakes functional as an ecosystem, including drinking water, but also recreational use, right? Industrial use, all of these other ways that we rely on this as, not only an important part of keeping us alive, right, but of keeping our economy overall going. And so I would say it matters, right? The health of the Great Lakes matters. I think pretty much in any polling I've seen, everyone can get on board with that. But it is possible for that quality to be depleted. And we're seeing lots of instances of that going on. That's particularly true as climate change, it brings its brunt to the Midwest, and we'll maybe talk about this a little bit more later. While we are sheltered in some ways from some of those effects, we are certainly not immune. And so you brought up the Great Lakes Compact, and I would say, when you're in the field of environmental law, you're often kind of stuck, I would say, defending the fact that we have all of these environmental regulations, because I think sometimes they can be the victim of their own success. And I think that the Great Lakes Compact, to some extent, that's true of that as well. So the Great Lakes Compact, I think, is responsible to a large part for the success overall of preserving the Great Lakes and the amount of Great Lakes water that has stayed within the Great Lakes watershed. So just as a brief amount of background, the compact essentially came out of various controversies to ship Great Lakes water to places like Asia, places to other parts of the US, to essentially bottle it up and send it around the world. And people started getting really worried about this, right? That even with such an amount of fresh water, that if you have enough people doing that, that's going to start to deplete this resource, especially when we know that water levels and water quantity are going to fluctuate over time. So this turned into a compact between the Great Lakes states, which you can kind of see a little bit up here on the map, as well as 2 Canadian provinces, right? Because this is not just the United States we're talking about, it's Canada too when it comes to management of the Great Lakes watershed. And they agreed to a number of well, stipulations essentially regarding the watershed. None of this is binding, right? It's a compact, it's not an official treaty, but the states and provinces did agree to things like not diverting water outside of the watershed, except in particular instances. And by doing that, hopefully we can account for then those drops of water that have already been accounted for that we can use, but we are essentially ensuring that that water is going to be continually part of this, this natural resource for many, many, many years to come. So I might be anticipating a little bit your question, but deferring to the slide here, I will say not that much of Illinois and Wisconsin is within the Great Lakes watershed, right? I mean, we tend to think about it because we're in Milwaukee, and we very much are, right? But the Great Lakes watershed ends pretty soon west of Milwaukee, meaning that after that point, any drop of water that falls is actually headed to the Mississippi River. It's not headed back into the Great Lakes. And that has a lot of implications in terms of how we're managing the water resource. But one of the biggest is if you're putting in a development in an area that's not within the Great Lakes watershed, there is not a as of right to use the Great Lakes water. In fact, under the Great Lakes Compact, you're really not supposed to be able to do that. There are exceptions, and Wisconsin has certainly made use of a number of those exceptions to divert that water. But that water is coming from other places other than the Great Lakes watershed. And so not only is it not true that the Great Lakes watershed can't be depleted, it's not even true that the Great Lakes watershed is providing a lot of the water for some of these development projects.
You know, what's really fun is our real estate investment program got a firsthand look at this recently when they were investing in the Caroline Heights deal with Mandel Group. And thank you, shout out to Mandel Group for letting us be partners and investors with you. And the development that they did out in Elm Grove, which is not in the Great Lakes watershed, and how a lot of the discussion around ultimately the approval of the project had to do with the potential for getting access to more of this fresh water in the future. And so it was great for our students to learn that, yes, these things do really matter. And you know what else matters is land, because God's not making any more of it, right, Brandon?
That's what we tell people.
Yeah. So, you know, what I love about having you here, Brandon, besides the fact that Perry Veith is one of our favorite people, is that you guys own 170,000 acres of land, I believe. So let's pull up the map of what you guys actually, where you own most of that land from a state standpoint. People can draw a lot of interesting conclusions from why the land you own is located, where it's located, or why you've invested in those areas. So let's get into a little bit more about, you know, Steve said this, it's about who has the land and why, and there's a lot of reasons why you own the land and you invest in that land. Tell us a little bit more about those investments, how you make those investment decisions. Why does the map look this way?
Yeah, so when we have a farmland fund, we buy farms, we buy land specifically to operate as farms or with local farmers as tenants. We like water. The cheapest form of irrigation is still, it rains when you're trying to grow something. So the Great Lakes region has that great irrigation infrastructure. We like groundwater for irrigation too. Generally, we view it because it's supplemental as a recharging resource or something that's going to be available, as opposed to in other regions you have depleting aquifers. But when we buy a property, it really has to cash flow as a farm. We have an evergreen fund, so we can hold it for 20, 30, 40 years, operate it as a farm, and that would meet our investment targets. But when you own land, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good that you're in the path of development. And as you start to acquire land and stack property upon property, particularly in the Midwest, we're doing that institutional roll-up that hasn't happened before. In other parts of the country, you have larger tracts of land because the Homestead Act wasn't the basis of ownership. It was plantations or ranches. So someone can deploy 40, 50, 100 million in one transaction. We do a lot of $2 to $5 million deals to build these larger portfolios that now, it just so happens that we're talking to a lot of developers to say, you can overlay our Google Earth map on what you have to say, is this in the path of what you're trying to do? And if there's a higher and better use, we're happy to pursue it. If not, like I said, we only underwrote a farmland value. So As it pertains to water as an option, we don't really know how to price that today, but we know it's a plus. As it pertains to renewables, we have almost a third of our portfolio under some type of renewable option. I grew up in an area that Rudy mentioned, the Marcellus Shale region, on a family farm that we didn't know what that was 40 years ago. We certainly do today, and we've cashed more checks from pumping gas than we ever did milking cows. But I definitely think those resources are something, when you own the land, you want to have access to them. And at least so far, you really aren't able to do much unless you, in terms of building carbon sequestration, renewables, if you don't have a land base.
So we're getting back to the basics here. We're talking about land. We're talking about how the impacts are on the environment and water, and we're talking about power. Steve, we're going to go back to you, and we're going to go back to the power issue as we start to kind of put this soup together a little bit more.
I know you have someone who works at a utility right there. I don't know why we're going back to the broker, right? But whatever, however we want to handle that, Andy.
We'll circle back to her for the smart answer. Yeah. Sticking with you. So Steve, you work nationally, especially in Chicago. What you do so well is you are constantly talking to investors, who are talking to the tenants, who are talking about what their needs are and moving forward. And Prahlad just kind of previewed this a little bit more, but talk about how much people are talking about power when it comes to actual users, when it comes to these investors, when it comes to these developers. How has that changed over time? What are you hearing on the street?
Well, it has absolutely changed for just straight industrial users. So the data center issue is a different issue. We're talking about, a warehouser or a manufacturer that has some level of power need. And as discussed, generally the Midwest has available power for those type of users. You have to make sure you've discussed that, but there are other parts of the country that have had severe problems. There's many developers who got themselves a nice, pretty 600,000-foot warehouse all done in California, ready to go. No, we don't have any power for you. You've got a year-and-a-half wait. Now, obviously, that's mismanaged along the way, but there is significant power problems in other markets, and that goes to the advantage of the Midwest on that sense. You are, as we onshore, as we get more manufacturing, and if that manufacturing is chip manufacturers or EV manufacturers or battery manufacturers, those are water-intensive uses that obviously needs to be managed, otherwise Sarah's going to yell at you pretty loud. I mean, we need to manage that. But those are onshoring manufacturing that I think is going to end up in the Midwest, or a lot of that's going to end up in the Midwest for the power and water issues. So it's absolutely talked about. It takes more time potentially to make sure you have that, but it's not a hindrance to development, and I think it's going to be a situation where, I'll give a story. So 12 years ago, there was Jim McGill, who's a guy I know people might hear, but he was a Prologis person. He was giving a speech and talking about a Tesla battery manufacturer that I think ended up in Vegas or Texas or somewhere. And it was in front of this many people, and he says, yeah, well, that Tesla, we'll get that in Illinois anytime soon. And the audience cracks up laughing. I mean, so that was the concept. Well, not now. There's battery manufacturing being attracted to Illinois and other Midwestern places. We are in, certainly in Ohio, they've got huge chip manufacturing. There, you've got what's happening with the computer situation. So the Midwest is attracting these where it was literally a joke 10 years ago. So I think this is the renaissance. This is we've always got water, and you've been talking about it. We've always got power. We've been talking about it for 30 years. Well, now it is going to be the renaissance as we onshore this manufacturing, that we're going to be, we have at least the natural advantages. Now, there's plenty of unnatural advantages. I don't know if you guys pay taxes in Illinois or you know anything about what goes on there. There's other issues, but this is, I really think, I think the Midwest is going to be a huge recipient of this onshoring stuff.
Okay, so that was a pretty smart answer, Steve. So thank you. That was
Better
pretty
than
great.
the okay.
We'll take it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, this is great. So, Kate, we're gonna move to you then to take us even deeper on this, because most of us have no idea what we would, do you call it the power stack? Is that how you would refer to it? We really don't think in terms of what are all the different sources of how we get power. They matter from a development standpoint. They matter where they're coming from. They matter where those sources of power are located. And it certainly matters in terms of the cost to all of us and to the customers of, and the investors that are owning properties in this room. So let's talk a little bit about that capital stack, because I think it's really important for us to understand.
Yeah, so this graph, I'm kind of a utility nerd, so I find this super interesting. But this sort of shows you really what we're talking about here as far as our customer power needs, right? As a public utility, again, we have an obligation to serve our customers reliably, affordably, et cetera. And this graph shows you our load curve in like a 7-day window, the week of May 28th, 2024. So that's 7 days of the week. You can see the load curve is the black line. And on that black line, it shows how, like, as during the daytime, the energy use increases. You know, we hit our peak, usually about late afternoon. It depends upon the day, but and you can see that load curve throughout the week. And then in terms of the power and how that stacks up, as Andy mentioned, on the bottom of that is our kind of our base load, nuclear. We still have nuclear in Wisconsin. The Point Beach Power Plant still operates up in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. So that's the red line, and that's our base load, a little over 1,000 megawatts. We have a little bit of hydro that also fills in. And then as you can see, the renewables is the gray, which is wind, and then the orange is solar. And those are very variable, right? It depends upon if it's a sunny day or not a sunny day, if it's windy or not. But then you can see in those shoulder hours, the orange, which is the gas generation. So, you know, in the sort of wee hours of the morning and later on in the afternoon and the evenings, then our natural gas units really kick in and provide that reliable 24/7, 365 source of power for all our customers. And that is extremely important to our data center hyperscaler customers, because they really rely on firm power to supply their energy source.
So Kate, when we look at this, I also am a nerd. Okay, Kate. So I love this chart as well. But tell us, give us some context. So where are we going from here? This was a year ago. This is kind of the stack.
Yeah.
And the colors are great. You can see why nuclear is so important, actually, when you look at this. And this is the load capacity, and you go, oh, well, there's 1,000 megawatts every day, no matter what. Here you go, everyone. But, of course, it's a fraud issue for so many valid reasons. So maybe not taking nuclear off, but where does this chart start to change in the future? And I know renewables are part of that.
Right. Yeah, I think, well, you can see the little bit of green, right? That's battery storage. We are adding more batteries, although, you know, batteries have its own limitations because they can only discharge about 4 hours-ish of battery that's partnered up with utility scale solar. But yeah, you'll see more solar. I know probably we'll talk a little bit about, yeah, sure. So we are making, over the next 4-ish years, we're quadrupling our renewable investment. As you can see, an additional 4,300 megawatts of additional energy over the next 4 years. So that's a lot of renewable energy that we're adding to the system. So solar, wind, and battery, those are all combined. So, sure.
So the question was, does Wisconsin truly get 70% of the power needs from solar on this previous slide?
Yeah, it just really depends upon the time of year. Like, for example, in the winter, and I'm going to get a little nerdy, but this is a nice, you know, almost summer week of Wisconsin. So you're going to get quite a bit of solar, especially, you know, during the warm parts of the day. And so they will contribute quite a bit to our energy needs. In the winter, that looks dramatically different, right? We don't get the solar that we would get in the summertime. So it really just depends upon the time of day, the time of year kind of thing.
But to go back to this slide, it's, I mean, $5.5 billion of this $9 billion that you're investing goes into solar. It must be because it's the cost to produce it makes sense. I mean, Prologis is doing this, you know, across their buildings all over the United States and the world. I imagine that's part of it.
Well, ours is, you know, I don't know a lot about what Prologis does. We build utility scale solar projects. So those are like 200 megawatts, 300 megawatt projects. So those require thousands of acres of farmland, as you probably know. So they do take up quite a bit of space. But those are the kinds of projects that we're building. And we have built some, we have gotten some recently approved, and we're in the process of getting quite a few more approved over the next 4 or 5 years.
Brandon, I mean, Kate perfectly kind of set you up there. You need a lot of land to do the utility scale type power, and clearly that is a really important part of this power stack moving forward. So I know your team studies this a lot, and we kind of had a conversation about this. You shared with us this fascinating slide, which is about energy transitions in the United States. I know you've looked at this before, and you talk about this sometimes with your investors. Can you kind of walk everyone through, give everyone even more context to how you think about this? Then we can bring it back to the investment space, how you think about investing on the land side.
Yeah, well, I actually shared this slide almost as a joke because it says energy transitions, and what you'll notice when you look at that is there's almost never been a transition. The same amount of wood and peat that was burned 200 years ago is still burned today. All there is are additions over time. If you look at that stack of power, the only one that's ever really gone down is nuclear, and that's a regulatory issue. Has nothing to do with need. So what we view at Cirrus, we look at land, but if there are higher and better uses, whether we're leasing minerals, whether we're doing solar or wind, and most of our land is concentrated in the Great Lakes region, so it's Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, New York. That makes up almost 90% of our portfolio. We own some land and some farms in other states, but in this Great Lakes region, there's been a ton of demand for renewables. Solar, off the charts. The Inflation Reduction Act was a great handout to developers. That they pocketed a lot of that. But a lot of that will go into projects. I don't know if it will increase the percentage of projects that are actually completed, but certainly it kept some of these renewable developers alive. And what we see is we like that higher and better use. Probably 10 years ago when we were buying farmland, if there were 2 tracts of land that were selling on the same day, and one of them was a couple hundred acres of open ground, all tillable, and the other one had a power line or 2 cutting through it, we would buy the one with the power line at a discount because farmers didn't want it. And little did we know that that was like buying land next to the exit on the interstate. So we have farms that are chopped up by transmission lines, one in particular in Michigan that will almost certainly be a data center. It's a great irrigated farm today, but it has 2 transmission lines, one MISO, one PJM that bisect it, and it sits next to a brand new natural gas-fired power plant that was constructed a few years ago. So if you're looking for a data center in Niles, Michigan, I think you should come talk to me about that. But yeah, we talk to everybody about how can we stack some of these things. It seems like wind is almost dead in most of the regions we're at, because to do that large wind project, you need 20 or 30,000 acres, which means you have a lot of neighbors. You need distribution and transmission, so it needs to be in places where you can actually hook up to the grid. We sell easements on our properties for actually a data center we're likely doing right in South Bend, Indiana, not far from our office. We sold an easement to AEP a few years ago to run a transmission line through there, and that's going to be the reason we have a data center. So I think you're definitely seeing utilities, AEP in particular, I think has a moratorium in Ohio and Illinois for data center sites right now for allocating power. That may change over time, but the amount of land we own in Indiana and Michigan has really upped the demand for, even 3 weeks ago, I think I got 6 calls on a Sunday about one 800-acre farm we own in southeastern Michigan, and the price per acre went from farmland price to 8 times farmland price to 20 times farmland price before Monday morning. So we haven't sold that yet, but we will, or we'll put it under an option at least. But it seems like things are moving very quickly. Yeah, exactly.
So, but talk to us about, like, renewables are part of your investment strategy at this point. I mean, we have the photo of one of your farms here that has the wind generation. I know solar is a big part of it too. How do you think about renewables and essentially adding to the grid in a lot of ways in the Midwest and already relatively cheap power on a national basis? How do you guys think about that from an investment decision?
So historically, we would put almost no value on that. In an underwriting, if there were existing wind turbines, then we'd capitalize whatever that revenue was into the land value. And like I said, wind is very difficult to permit because these projects are so large. There are people that locals don't want them. There are people that travel around the country fighting them on behalf of migratory birds. So it's just a problem. And frankly, from a wind standpoint, it's slightly incremental to farmland value. So if you have a 600-acre farm that generates, call it $500,000 in revenue a year, that wind might have 2 or 3 turbines, it's maybe $100,000. It doesn't add up to much. Whereas if that same farm were to go to solar, you're taking a farm that generated $500 an acre in rent, and now it's $1,500 to $2,000 an acre in rent. We only paid $5,000 or $6,000 an acre for that farm, so now you're looking at a 2 or 3 year payback that we didn't underwrite, and you're putting it on a 30 or 40 year lease with inflation hedged escalators. So that actually is now something we're excited about. We can take farmland. Now there's pushback from everybody in terms of who wants renewable or not, or, I mean, we have farms in upstate New York that if I drive to where I grew up, we drive right through Ithaca, the home of a great university, Cornell, but you'll see signs for no wind, no industrial solar, shut down nuclear, no fracking, which means they have no clue about how anything actually happens, but that is the reality we deal with in a lot of places. So we have some farmers that are huge proponents of adding this incremental revenue that for them is a diversifier in their own portfolio. You have other farmers that'll fight it tooth and nail because this means acres coming out of production. And if they own the land, they have a different view than if they rent the land. So we view this as we want to look at all options, but we only underwrite, at least so far, to that farm standard, and then everything else is a free option.
This is just fascinating. So, Sarah, we're going to come back to you because we've now set the stage with, okay, we have access to cheap power. There's clearly an investment decision to be made around generating more of that power. We have access to fresh water within limits, and we need to be kind of thinking about some of those environmental impacts. Now, there's this really easy story that I think a lot of us in the Midwest like to think, which is the Midwest is going to be a climate oasis in the future, right? So Prologis every year has buildings that are impacted by this all over the world. Not as much in the Midwest, which is nice. So hey, if this keeps happening, maybe all this population is going to eventually move to the Midwest. How exciting is that story, right? But I don't know that it's as easy as that when you start to talk about real experts. So without, totally pouring cold water on us, what's the reality when you start to think about these environmental impacts, clearly having the impact, the potential to drive people to the Midwest in the future, how climate plays into that?
Yeah, well, I don't like the term climate oasis or haven because it somehow absolves us of having to do anything about it, right? We just got lucky and here we are. And it's just not true, right? There's going to be plenty of climate impacts in the Midwest. I don't think I need to tell anybody that. We're already experiencing it, right? We can tell that the winters are much warmer, there's many more extreme rain events, things are feeling different already. That's going to continue. Now, are we in an area of relative climate security? Of course, yeah, and that is a real asset, and I think we should feel good about that. But what that means is that this is an opportunity for planning, not an opportunity to just go in full blazes, doesn't matter, we got all the water, we got everything going for us here. Setting aside the kind of collective action problem of climate change and the fact that anything we do here is going to contribute to that, right? Just looking at the more localized things that we could be doing, I already talked about water. I mean, water is plentiful until it's not, right? And that means water is available and somewhat cheap until it is not because people start restricting that water because it becomes clear there's been too many withdrawals. Even looking at the kind of more localized collective action problem of the Great Lakes, Wisconsin's not the only one who's drawing water from the Great Lakes. Illinois is not the only one, right? Not only the United States is not the only one. And so the more we see individual states permitting projects, I think the more likely it is there's going to be pushback from other states, right, and even other countries about those withdrawals. So it just means we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention to things like, how are we using the water? Do all industrial processes need drinking water? Probably not, right? There's probably ways to better use and manage the resource in ways that are responsible. Could we be doing a better way of regenerating the resource? Definitely. We've long acted like we have this infinitely renewable resource, but that's not how people treat water in Arizona, right? People in Arizona are applying many different technologies, and I think it is not a time to take for granted the things that give us that kind of relative security here. The same is true of housing. I mean, cost of living is great until it's not, right? Until if and when we do see an influx of people moving to the Midwest, which I think there's some reason to suggest will happen. Look, if you don't plan for people coming to a community, then affordable housing can go away very, very quickly, as we've seen in markets all around the United States. And so if places in the Midwest are serious about that, then we need to be zoning differently, we need to be planning for housing differently, and we need to be really thinking about how we want those communities to look. I mean, the overall legacy of the kind of upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region, is kind of recovering from various industrial and environmental choices that were made decades ago that now we're having to deal with, including drinking water supplies being contaminated, which is why we're seeing kind of withdrawals from the Great Lakes. And so I won't throw cold water on this idea of, yeah, Great Lakes, I mean, frankly, and I say this genuinely, that was one of the reasons that I've lived in Chicago for about 8 years now, that I was drawn to this particular area, because looking at all of the climate research, I was like, that's where I want my kids to be growing up. So I truly believe this, but I also truly believe that if you don't plan for it, that's going to go away easily, within just a couple of decades, right? It doesn't take long for those resources to be depleted, and then for it to be a problem then for future generations and future, developers and investors to have to deal with down the road.
And I think that you're essentially previewing some of the work that we're hoping to do together with the Veith Institute around this idea of planning. It's a brilliant way to think about the world. Rudy told this incredibly important story about how this little village in Elk Grove didn't have a whole lot, but somebody decided to invest in fiber, and now they have this data center that you said was just some crappy building that they ended up selling for $750 million, right, Steve?
It was a nice building, but it wasn't any $750 million building.
If Prologis owned it, it was nice, right? Yeah, that's it. So we're going to have time for just a few questions, so please get them ready in your minds but before we wrap up here. But Steve, let's just kind of pull this back to the investor view, and kind of thinking about how a lot of us in the room are trying to think to this as it relates to, we have a lot of these advantages, right, as it relates to water and power and, climate and cost of living. So what do you think needs to happen to, get investors that much more interested in the Midwest and putting their investment dollars here? And maybe even as an extension of that, what do you see that might drive more of that population here? This is the big question, so take us home.
The population growth issue is interesting to me. Well, interesting in that, again, I've been in this business for 33 years, and in the greater Chicago area, there's the same amount of people who live there today as it did 33 years ago. And it's given me a very odd perspective when I start doing national work through another business I'm in, of places like Florida and Texas and where there's real population growth. And, so my perspective has always been logistics. Well, it's logistics. Where can we get stuff to from Chicago? Because we've had a flat population for 33 years. Well, they don't have a flat population in Fort Myers, and people are building warehouses in Fort Myers. It makes no sense to me. There's nowhere to go. Well, no, because they grow, and it's servicing the people who live in Fort Myers. I'm like, God, I never even thought of that. I mean, wow. I mean, who needs that? So I do think that again, as we talked about, I think there is the opportunity to bring manufacturing and clean manufacturing, well-managed manufacturing, planned manufacturing back to the Midwest that will create jobs, that will create population growth, because you have to create jobs to create population growth. And affordability, all of these issues are issues, but in general, compared to other places, and Chicago as an example, affordability is talked about all the time in Chicago, and it's completely an issue, but it's not the issue that it is in other major gateway cities that are, it's on fire where you can't rent anything. So it needs to be solved. Now, I think as a Chicagoan, I live in the city, the the challenge is the fiscal issues that we're dealing with. The challenge is not this natural, it is, can we not screw up the government so badly that you can still make it a livable place and people will come to, and can it be affordable? Now, I certainly am positive on that, and you've seen a lot of good things happening in the city in regards to retail filling back in. I mean, we've got our retail corridors are now, in some of the neighborhoods, fully leased, better than pre-COVID. And so there's and that gets no press at all. No one knows about that. I think we've got terrible PR in Chicago about, Jesus, I can't go there, I'm going to get shot or whatever. I mean, it's just not, yeah, there's problems, but it's not true. And if you go out in Chicago, Fulton Market on a Thursday night, everything seems to be fine, and it's full of young people, and it's where people want to live in the Midwest, where young people want to live. So I do think I just think there needs to be more economic opportunity to have job growth, and that will be in the tech sector as well. I mean, it's a good place to do business, and that goes for Milwaukee to a little bit lesser extent, but I mean, there's still great things happening in Milwaukee, and certainly to places like Columbus and Indianapolis and Louisville and these secondary cities that are all just a better place to live than they were 20 years ago. And you can go to a restaurant in the Third Ward and you think you're in New York. I mean, it wasn't always like that. So I think that these Midwestern cities have done a good job of reinventing themselves, and but the job's not done.
Yeah, and exciting from the government standpoint, the announcement about TIF policies changing here in Milwaukee and the focus on more workforce housing. Yet another.
I think Milwaukee's done a really good job of doing some of those things, and they're on the cutting edge more so than Chicago.
If there's no, I mean, just such a major theme is just there are so many advantages in the Midwest that I think we often forget about that we can grow off of. And I think that the conversation becomes nuanced, and I hope all of you got a lot out of that today. We definitely have time for one, maybe two questions. So if you have a question, please go ahead, raise your hand. I'll seek you out, and then if you can say the question loud enough, I will repeat it so that everybody can hear it, and we'll go from there. So any questions for our panelists today?
I'll call on someone. I don't care. I mean, we want some question right there.
The question was, how did he initially get involved in brokerage and investment sales? And I think I heard land and utilities and teaching at law schools. Is that right?
Yes. Mine, I went to Marquette and had a great time, and then I went to University of Wisconsin's real estate school and had a less of a good time and got hired by a UW grad 33 years ago at a company called Bennett and Conweiler, which is now Colliers, as an analyst. So started a long time ago, and I never left Rosemont. I do not recommend that. I mean, do not do that if that's your career. Don't stay 30 years in Rosemont.
Oh, I mentioned I grew up on a family farm but worked on Wall Street for 10 years, and I mentioned at lunch to someone that I took an 85% pay cut to move from New York City to South Bend, Indiana. I would recommend doing something like that sometime because it's a good story if it doesn't work out, and if you manage a $1.8 billion fund, it works out great. So,
Great. Okay.
So I went to undergrad at Wisconsin quite a few years ago, and then I ended up abroad. I studied abroad in Japan for a year and then went back after undergrad for 3 more years. And then I decided I needed to do something else because I was working in a small office. And I applied to law school, including Georgetown. I got waitlisted there because I thought I'd practice international law. I ended up back at Wisconsin. And anticipating I would go back to Japan eventually and continue practice there. And then I met my future husband, and now I'm back in Milwaukee.
Oh, did I
But I
hear,
have
Brandon,
3
you
kids,
have a
and it's
minor
great.
in Japanese? Can you two speak Japanese to each other right now?
It's been too long for me.
I wondered if this would come up. This is great. Yeah. Sarah.
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas. I was always interested in a lot of the environmental land use issues I saw going on. I ended up eventually going to law school and was in private practice for about 6 or 7 years out of law school. Always kind of knew that commercial litigation was not going to be my the place where I ended my career, and then kind of transitioned into academia as part of this environmental law clinic at Georgetown. And as Andy told you, I ended up at NIU for about 7 years and then just came to Marquette.
And we're glad to have you here, Sarah, absolutely. Please join me in thanking our panelists that are here today. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to have you stay here for just a minute. I'll wrap up. All right. I'm going to have our panelists stay where they are on stage because we are to the final part of the day. And just a few final thank yous. Thank you to our annual sponsors once again. You are amazing, and we are so grateful to you. Thank you to our gold sponsors that you can see on the screen here, our blue sponsors, and to our silver sponsors. And of course, save the date. We have a very busy second half of the year coming up with our Chicago Real Estate Leadership Breakfast that we're very close to grabbing an unbelievable keynote for. So look for an announcement for that, as well as our 7th annual Golden Eagle Real Estate Gala, which is always the party of the year on Friday, November 7th here in Milwaukee, which you are all invited back to. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the students who are here, our board members, our faculty. Wishing everyone enjoy the networking that we have for the rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Take care.